So for today's Small and Supercharged podcast, we're with someone who's a bit of a legend, and my knight in shining armour is Ray, who runs Worcester Web Studio. So thank you very much for joining us, Ray. You introduced yourself in a much better way than I did. Tell us about your business and what you do.
Thanks. So my name's Ray Gillespie. I work for Worcester Web Studio. We are a full service digital agency. So we do web design, hosting, email, marketing, social media management, PPC management. We do the whole suite of digital services, and we're based in Worcester.
So you started off just working on your own, and now you've built a team. How big is your team now?
There's 6 of us in total, 4 permanent staff, and then 2 guys who are freelancers who sort of drop in and out as and when the workflow requires it.
That's really cool. And how did you start? How did you even get into it to start with? Because was it something that you felt there was a real need for, or a passion? How did you do it?
It's I think I've basically been inexorably drawn into it because some people are just like somebody who's good with their hands, they'll eventually end up as a carpenter or something like that. I've always just really, really enjoyed working with computers, and ever since a really young age, I've always been into this kind of thing. And I remember we had one module in web design, which was my kind of introduction to it. And literally from that one lesson, I just jumped straight onto it and started learning how to do it in my own time, building my own sites.
Wow.
And it was something it very quickly became a hobby, and then it became a hobby that gave me a bit of pocket money. And meanwhile, actually in my kind of formal career, I've mainly done sort of digital marketing rather than web design. And the web design was a sideline that I just sort of kept up. And then it got to about 2012, and I actually thought, well, I could combine those 2 things. Because not that many people actually do both. Well, most people are a web design firm that dabbles in SEO and stuff like that, or vice versa. But I've got a lot of experience in both, and I really enjoy doing both. So I just decided, I'd like to put them together because that's what I really like doing.
No, I think that's brilliant. Well, obviously very, very useful for me as well. So I'm very pro all of that.
Sounds good.
So what I did this time for the podcast, just to mix it up a bit, is I asked people in various groups that I'm in, and actually on Instagram too, for questions. So there's quite a few common themes. So I'll combine some of the questions I've had. And there were a lot of questions, which was really lovely. So let's start at the very, very basics, which is, what is hosting?
Well, hosting refers to having files, databases, information saved somewhere on a computer, usually called a server, but it doesn't have to be a server technically. But it's saved somewhere remotely, which means it's saved away from your office or your home. And you can use that service to have a website. You can use it for your email. You can use it for all kinds of things. So it essentially is a location somewhere outside of your office where all your important website information or emails or everything like that are all stored, and you can access them however you need.
But it's not a computer like I'm on my MacBook Air now. It's a beast of a thing, isn't it? It's a different animal.
Usually, yeah, but you can run servers off anything. You can install. We just for fun, we installed a web server on a Raspberry Pi, which is the size of a credit card.
Oh wow!
So you can do it, on anything you like. And what's nice is that most, probably 80-90% of websites are hosted using an operating system called Linux. So most people are aware of Windows, and you have Mac OS for Mac users. Linux is it's a really nerdy operating system. So most people wouldn't use it for their day-to-day office management, but that's what most web servers run on. And the really nice thing about Linux is it's incredibly lightweight. So you could have a computer that would barely run Windows XP, but could happily run a small web server because the requirements are so low. So actually, some of the servers that websites are hosted on are surprisingly low spec. You don't really need a powerhouse to run small websites with low traffic. But generally, as computer hardware is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, You generally find now that most servers are fairly capable machines in their own right, and sort of our top end servers now are way more powerful than a desktop computer. But that's only reserved for, a fraction of websites really, because most don't need anything like that.
So the hosting, if you just have a WordPress site, just say you've got a blog, which is one of the questions we have in, how will you go about getting hosting for that? Because there are lots of different options of how you can do that, aren't there?
Yeah, and I think that is a minefield. It's a legitimate sort of question. Well, where do I host? Because there are so many hosting solutions, and actually, there isn't a really right or wrong answer. But there are some platforms that are kind of established now and that have a track record of being good. And really, rather than looking at the technical side of things, I would more look on that side of things. Really, you look at 123reg or Ionos or Simply Hosting. Any of these guys, if they've been around for a long time and they've got a good reputation, then I think that's probably at least a good starting point. But there are certain things you can look for in a hosting platform. So there are things like a lot of platforms now will give you a free SSL certificate, which is normally sort of 40, 50 quid a year. So that's a benefit. And the ultimate decision really comes down to the performance of your website. So if you find your website's running slowly, then that platform isn't sufficient for what you need.
So you said about, did you just call it uptime or runtime was the first thing you said. So that's the amount of time percentage-wise that the server is up and running and your website will be fully functioning.
Yeah, so that's what, uptime is basically, the availability of a site as a percentage. And most platforms are 99.9% or greater. And it depends on what you need. If you've got an enormous e-commerce website that's your bread and butter, then that 0.1% can make a difference. If you can shave that down to 0.001% downtime, then that's going to make a difference to your bottom end. So you'd be willing to pay for a higher spec server that's got less downtime. If, on the other hand, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, but you're not going to get 100% from anybody, are you?
It's pretty unlikely. Certainly not for sort of small to medium-sized websites. You can sort of effectively get 100% uptime with mirrored servers and all kinds of stuff, but in reality, the effect of the minimal downtime that most platforms give it's basically negligible these days.
So you can tell us the things that you would look for then. So if someone is looking to find somewhere to host let's just say a blog to start with, so no e-commerce aspect, what things would you suggest that they looked for? Or, because there's a massive range in price as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there are. And it depends what you need as well. So if you want email hosting as well, then you probably want a platform that's going to do both of those well for you. If you literally just want a blog, then you probably find the WordPress hosting platform is a good place to start because it's very cheap.
So how does that work? Because if you have for example, so it's my name, so it's riafreeman.wordpress.com, that's free, isn't it? But if you take the WordPress out, you pay.
Yes.
Is that, so how much? It's not a huge amount, is it? I have looked into this.
No, it's not. It's £4 a month or something. I can't remember what it is, but it's not a huge amount. But the issue with the WordPress hosting is that it does start to build up. Those costs do start to get quite high as you start adding features. So it's ideal if you're starting out blogging, you've got no visitors or anything, then probably pay to have the WordPress.com removed. But apart from that, it's fine. But once you start getting traction, you want to start advertising on your site, that kind of thing, then it's definitely worth at that stage saying, okay, do I need to move off this to a dedicated hosting platform? And that's one of the things that's very confusing for a lot of people, is that you've got actually two completely different types of WordPress. You have WordPress.com and WordPress.org. The software they run is identical, but one, which is WordPress.com, is hosted by WordPress and you are tied into the WordPress.com platform there. WordPress.org is the self-hosted thing. So that gives you absolute control over everything.
Okay.
So WordPress.org is generally what I'd recommend for somebody who wants to get the most out of their website. Now, the features that you can do that you have access to with WordPress.org with your self-hosting, I'm pretty sure if you pay WordPress enough on WordPress.com, you can have that stuff. But it does get quite expensive, and we get quite a few clients who started out on WordPress.com. They're now starting to pay 20, 30 quid a month for stuff, and they feel the need for it. So they want to move to a WordPress.org platform, and everything can be transferred completely, 100% straight away across. But then that gives them a lot more control, and it usually works out a bit cheaper too.
So with, obviously, WordPress is one option if someone just had a blog. And obviously I know you do hosting and I am hosted with you, but that's more of a managed solution, which is amazing.
That's right.
But there are other options. You can just go straight to, I can't think of any hosting companies because I just...
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot out there. The ones that work quite well, 123reg are okay. 1-on-1, also known as Ionos now, they're pretty good. Fast Hosts, they're pretty good. I like those guys. 20i, they're a new player, but they're very good.
They're quite cheap, aren't they, to get your website hosted with them?
Yeah, they usually, all those guys are relatively cheap. And it just depends on what kind of performance you need off the site, and whether you want a free SSL and whether you want email, and because those are the kind of things that can bulk it up. But I think the performance is the main thing. And what's interesting is that sometimes actually you may have a relatively small site with not that many pages, but your theme is fairly resource intensive, so it uses a lot of server resources. Yeah. And that can mean that even though you don't have a huge site number of pages, you do need a fairly decent spec server to keep it running quickly.
No, completely. So there's a lot of different options that you can choose, and they say that the prices vary enormously. So what if you were thinking about moving hosting? What questions would, if I was moving to somebody, I'm good, but what questions would, because when I spoke to you, I was like, right, I'm really confused about this. I need to move. And I think I asked you about uptime, how easy it was to transfer, all these things. What advice would you give people for what they need to ask?
Well, the first thing I would say is look at feedback yourself. And if there's good feedback for a host, that's a positive sign. Then when it comes to actually asking the host questions, email is always a big thing, because sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, you get email with this, but you get a 100 megabyte mailbox. And then to increase the capacity for your mailboxes is 20 quid, 30 quid a mailbox. And then it's suddenly that kind of site, that sort of things can rack up. So I would give the host actually as much information as you can about what you've got currently, because you may have, you may have a lot of large mailboxes, for example. And then I would look at just whether you get a free SSL certificate and what kind of support they offer. So some hosts are basically, they just drop you and they say, yeah, there you go. That's your server, log in and do it. And then if you get a problem, it can be pretty hard to get a response out of them. A lot of hosts are the opposite of that and really, really helpful. And will often go above and beyond the sort of just fixing server problems and give you advice on how to improve performance of your website. There's not really a server issue, but it does kind of overlap. So ask them what their kind of support policy is for problems.
And what would you expect to see? Because I know that you've basically got a 24/7 one, haven't you? Although you're not a huge team, but there is a contact for if something goes awry at the weekend, for example.
Yes.
And I think some of the big people have got various supports and things like that. So it's not out of the ordinary to have that level of support from any different kind of hosting package.
Not really. I think the main thing is the weekends. So evenings, they're not generally not that bad. If your website goes down at 2 a.m., the chances of people noticing that if it's a UK website are very slim. Yes. So as long as you can contact someone at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's not normally a big deal. Weekends though, that's a big thing. But all the main players, they all have weekend support at least, if not sort of 24/7 support. Yeah. But if you were going with a smaller provider, then that's something I would check, because the last thing you want is your website to go offline at 6:30 on a Friday and not be fixed or even looked at till 9 o'clock on a Monday morning.
No, completely. And especially, again, flipping back to e-commerce now, that's just you can't have that as an option.
Totally.
Work.
Yeah, and that's the big thing with, the decision is that it ultimately is going to be governed by what kind of support you need for your website. And like you say, something like e-commerce, you definitely want faster response times and more sort of redundant data. So, if something does go off, you can quickly resolve, the situation and switch to a backup quickly or whatever you need.
Completely. Now, you mentioned SSL certificates a few times, and I do know what these are, but could you just explain what they are and also the impact they have, because they can have a real impact on your Google ranking as well, can't they now?
Yeah, SSL certificates are interesting because they are basically becoming standard now. So you didn't really used to have them, and then they were introduced, or sort of became widespread anyway, for security reasons. And that, they're good. And what they do, there's a lot of misinformation about SSL certificates. So what they don't do is protect you against any kind of attacks or anything. So, well, not, I suppose they strictly do, but I'll explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
But what they don't do, they don't stop people from just bombarding your website with hacking attempts. They don't do anything that will kind of bolster you in defense of that. But what they do is they encrypt the data that is sent back and forth from your website to your users. So, for example, somebody comes to your website and they fill out your contact form. If it's not using an SSL certificate, the data they send you is just essentially open for anyone on that network to read. So now normally that's probably not a big deal. So you're at home and you do that and you send your contact details or your information through to somebody. There's no hackers on your home network, hopefully, so you're probably fine. But as soon as you start moving into areas of public Wi-Fi, anybody with a tiny little bit of software that knows a tiny little bit about hacking can sit there and it's called sniffing, and they will basically sit there on the network and look for patterns and look for @ symbols and stuff like that. Okay. And they'll just get a plain text dump of all of the information that's sent through unencrypted transmission. So the SSL completely obliterates that. It encodes the information that is sent to and from websites, so that if anybody's sitting on the network, they just get a jumbled up, just garbled heap of nonsense. So
and
what
I
it will
it's
mean
even
is
more important with your like credit card details and things, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And now what started happening was that, when SSLs were first used, they were reserved for payment forms. So you put your credit card details in, that's sent over HTTPS or using an SSL certificate. And that's great. And that is kind of where you would start with something like this. And that's right. But what's happened is that, particularly with GDPR, the requirements have spread out, because it's not just about protecting your credit card data, it's about protecting your address. Or it could be other sensitive information. You could be applying for jobs. There could be health sort of details that you're submitting. And if anybody can pick up that stuff, it doesn't take long for someone to start building a picture of you, and potentially then either hack into some of your own services. If you use the same password on loads of stuff, and your password is sent to a website without using encryption, then suddenly someone's got your email address and your password for that site. They check your email, they see if that uses the same password. Before you know it, they're in. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff there. So basically, SSL certificates have just become effectively mandatory now. One of the reasons for that, certainly in Europe, is the implementation of GDPR, because it has effectively become the law that you have to do that. But also, like you said earlier, this is important for your SEO. And Google, as the police force of the web, have decided that they want to push the use of SSL certificates, which is great. It's a good thing. So what they've started doing is putting warnings in Chrome. So when you're using Chrome, Firefox done the same thing. I think they might have even done it before Chrome. And Safari, they'll start saying, "Hold on a minute, you're entering details on a website that's not secure."
Yes, you get like a big box, don't you, and a big red cross, and you think, "Oh God, don't do this."
Yeah, that's right. And so that's then pushing the incentive to website owners and hosts to use HTTPS or SSL certificates on their websites. And what they're also doing is they're amending, they're letting the having an SSL certificate influence your SEO. So Google will prefer websites that have an SSL certificate, because Google's whole aim really is in its search results to provide the best quality results it can. And it considers websites that use an SSL certificate to be a higher quality experience for the user, because they are safer for the user data.
That's really interesting. I mean, really positive, but really interesting. That's something that, SEO itself is a bit of a minefield anyway, but just little tweaks like that can really make a big difference to your ranking potentially, and allow you to outrank competitors by making something like that part of what you do.
Yeah, and I think they are still quite small changes. You're not going to go from position 10 to position 1, by enabling HTTPS or using an SSL certificate on your website. But what it will do is it might just give you the edge on a competitor that you're ranked very similarly to. But like a lot of SEO, really, it's all the little bits that add up that can give you an edge over everybody else, and it's, a lot of SEO isn't about, all right, you do this and you'll get to the top. It's do this, 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 and this, and then do that. And then look at continually doing this every month, and then you'll grow. So yeah, it's definitely an important factor, but a lot of people think that it's a kind of silver bullet, which it's not, especially as almost everybody now has an SSL certificate on their website.
No, completely. So one of the questions we had in as well was about selecting the right company for your website and for your hosting. And one of the points that they raised is that the prices seem to vary so much between some hosts and other hosts, and also website design and other website design. And the question was, can Ray give some pointers, benchmarks on how us untechy folk can look at things from a quote project guide to help us find the right people for the job? So, no pressure there.
That's a seriously interesting and complex question, because there is no benchmark that you can judge this against. And I've been in roles in the past where we've outsourced the website development, where I've been in a meeting with the director of the company. He said, right, Ray, what have we got? What have these guys come back with? And I've handed over a quote for £2,000 and a quote for £20,000 for the same project.
Wow.
And then the question is, well, what's the difference?
And sometimes there isn't, or
there is. I'd be very surprised if anybody would do £2,000 worth of work for 20 grand. But in terms of what's delivered at the end, there might not be that much difference. It just depends on how you approach it. So, for example, you can use a third-party theme. So if you're building an e-commerce website, and that's what the £20,000 thing I was talking about was, you can just get an off-the-shelf theme for that. So let's say you use OpenCart, which is an e-commerce platform, a bit like WordPress but purely shopping. You can buy a theme for that, or you can get a free theme, install that, job done. Or you could have somebody design and build you a bespoke theme for that, which is probably starts at about £5,000. So
work involved with producing that.
Yeah, and that's not people just taking the mick and charging £5,000 for nothing. There can be a lot of work in that. But to the end user, actually, there might not be that much difference. If you get a really nice looking third-party theme versus a well-designed and developed one, ultimately, it's about what is going into the production of that theme that will be the differentiator. So if you've got a really small shop and you've got a couple of products and you're starting out, you won't see the benefit from spending £20,000 on an e-commerce website. But if you've got a very big website and you've got a lot of old history, so you've got lots of order history, you've got lots of products already on there, lots of customers, you need to transfer those. You've got some very specific requests. Maybe you've got brand guidelines that need to be adhered to. And you've got particular emphasis on SEO or the user experience that you're not going to find in a third-party theme. Then a bespoke theme that someone sits down and builds specifically for you, you are going to get a lot of value out of that. You can get £20,000 worth of value out of that, because if you've got a busy e-commerce website and this bespoke theme gives you an increased conversion rate on the website of 1%, 2%, 3%, within a year or less, you'll have that £20,000 back, no problem. And if you've got somebody who's a very experienced developer who can transfer everything seamlessly from the old website, that may only take them a day to do it. But of course, the value of that is enormous, because if that goes wrong, you're using somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, and suddenly clients or customers log in and their order history is wrong or missing, or that could be a disaster. That could wipe out your business. So it's all about comparing what you've got with what you kind of need. And I know that's a very woolly answer.
It's interesting though to see why there might be that level of variation, and also maybe ways that people could cut down their costs if they wanted to. So like with using a theme that perhaps you got your web developer to customize for you, versus getting them to code it from the ground up, and looking at other options that could save you a lot of money at that stage in your business. and also
Yes.
appreciating when it might be worth investing more to get other aspect like an amazing customer experience at that different stage.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think if we're looking at sort of ballpark figures, I think, you know, if somebody's starting out a new business and it's a relatively small business, a relatively small website, I think a third-party theme is usually the way to go for something like that. And I think cost-wise, I think you'd probably want to cap that at something like £1,000. I don't think you'd want to spend much more than that on a third-party theme for a simple website.
And that would be not just buying the theme, that would then be getting the developer to actually create the site using that theme. So
yes,
bespoking it up, putting the images in, actually getting it all ready to go.
yeah, and essentially what they'd be doing is logging in. They'd be setting all the content out in the right locations. They'd be changing the design using the theme's own kind of, you know, builder software. And it would generally, be a case of just adding all of the content in for you. And that, you know, if it's a really, really simple site and you go to a small agency, you could be talking a couple of £100 for that. You know, it's all about really the scope of the site. Once you start getting into bespoke builds, then you really, I mean, cost-wise, you're probably looking at, for a really simple one, sort of £1,500 upwards for something like that, because there's a lot more of an involvement from the design point of view, from the planning, from all of the sort of every element of the user interface really would need to be set out in order to deliver what the website is trying to do. So you would have calls to action on there. You might have, if it's a shopping website, you know, sale things or promotional stuff on there. And all of that would need to be planned out, so it would take time. So really, you know, the sky's the limit if you're looking at a bespoke website or a bespoke theme.
And how would you go about getting the quotes in? I mean, I know what you said about hosting and getting other people's feedback, other people's recommendations, which I imagine is going to be the foundation of this too. But how many people would you speak to? Would you ask for like formal quotes, written quotes? I suppose it's that then everyone knows, everyone's on the same page in terms of expectations. So how would you suggest that moved on?
I think the best thing to do would be to put together your own like list of requirements in as much detail as you can, because what you're expecting isn't generally well, it can be very hard to get a grasp of that until you've actually had a really detailed chat. But if you can put that all down on paper, then you don't have to have the same conversation with every person. But also that will then let the people quoting for the work, it'll let them choose in their heads whether they'd recommend a third-party theme or a bespoke theme or a completely bespoke platform, and it would set it off on the right track from the start. So then you probably want, I'd say probably four quotes, maybe. Depends on what you're doing. And I would just basically get all of those out, compare the prices, see if you can work out which ones are offering what. You know, if some guy comes back and it's like, yeah, it's £500 for this third-party theme, somebody says it's £2,000 for a bespoke theme, that's probably fair game. It's just, why is one chosen a bespoke theme and one chosen a third-party theme? If someone comes back at £500 for a third-party theme and someone says £4,000 for a third-party theme, I'd probably question why that's so expensive, and maybe go back to that person and say, okay, look, we've been quoted a lot lower for this. Is there anything you're offering that they're not?
Yeah.
And then just go back to them with any questions like that.
I think that's a really good point, actually. A lot of people, I mean, actually the question that I phrased to you saying, the exact words were, when you are untechy, how untechy folk can get the right thing. I think a lot of people are sometimes made to feel kind of, this certainly has not been my experience with you at all, quite the opposite, but if you are feeling a little bit like you're not that clued up on it, it can be quite easy to feel like a bit of an idiot asking questions. But I'm very much of the opinion that if it's my money, I need to know the information.
Yeah, totally.
And I mean, would you definitely encourage the asking of questions on every level?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think as many questions as possible, because ultimately these guys want to win the work, so they want to get their quote to match what's required of the project as closely as possible. You know, nobody wants to overquote for something and not win it.
And I think
or
from the brand's point of view, or the person who wants the website's point of view, they're going to feel much more confident that they've picked the right people, not just in the answers, but actually how they're dealt with And I think
Yes.
that's such a telling thing, like the timeliness, the attitude that your messages are answered with. To me, that's such a game changer, because I don't want to be made to feel like an idiot if I've got a question that is perhaps a bit stupid because you deal with it every day, but equally that question is important to me. And I think it's important to have that relationship as well. And I think that's probably something you can pick up from the quotes and the interactions you have with the people who are providing them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because like you say, the attitude and even the answers you get, if you get somebody who throws a load of technobabble at you, that's probably going to be how they'll deal with you for every question you've got in your relationship with that agency. If you get somebody who explains it in really, clear terms right from the start, then you think, okay, well, they'll probably be like that when I've got tech issues later on.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more with that at all. I think that's a really good point. That's interesting. Actually, we've had a couple about the ease of switching things over. So one lady was keen to move from Blogger to a website, and she was worried that her history would be transferred, as in her old blog posts.
Yes.
I mean, that's something that when you move, is this just to a managed solution, or when you move, if you just move to like one of the big players that was much more, you're just buying the space on their server, renting it, would they be able to help you with that as well?
It depends on the company in question, really. So some will just say, look, it's a hands-off approach. Here's your server. If something goes wrong, we'll sort it, but it's up to you to migrate it. But more and more now, companies are putting in place mechanisms for migrating websites. And even if they don't have an explicit migration service, they will certainly assist with it, if not carry it out for you. I think ultimately you probably want to have someone who knows about transfer of web services, and who has a good idea of search engines and setting up redirects so that search engines are happy with how things are being carried out in the future. And really, I think as long as somebody who's relatively competent and experienced is involved at some stage of that, then it's usually a seamless process where everything is forwarded correctly, everything is carried over. I can't think of any times I've seen somebody where they've been trapped completely on a platform and not been able to move and take everything with them. But just sometimes, depending on what platform they're moving from, some of that work might be manual as opposed to a nice automated process.
Sure. And what kind of expected downtime, or whatever the correct term is, would you expect between moving a website from one place to another?
None. It's very rare you would need to have any downtime. The only exception really is if you've got a site that's being logged into frequently with people making changes to it. So an e-commerce website is an example. So once you start the transfer process, essentially you take a kind of snapshot of the old server and you move that to the new one. Now that snapshot will only take into account all of the files, all of the updates, and all of the database information at that point. So anything that happens to the website after that won't get transferred. So if you had an e-commerce website, for example, you start the transfer process at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Somebody places an order at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. That order won't end up on the new site.
I get you.
So in those situations, it's normally e-commerce, but there are some other websites where this is the case. You would need to put it into maintenance mode to stop people logging in and making changes. While that transfer is taking place. And then once the transfer is done, then you just enable the new site without maintenance mode, and people will start moving, shopping on there or visiting or whatever they're doing. So even in those cases, the downtime is usually only a few hours.
Gosh, that's really encouraging. And I know when I moved my site to you, I didn't notice it at all. I know you said, I think, was it the emails that can take a bit longer to sort themselves out?
Yeah, and actually in both the email and the website case, there is a delay where some people may still be connecting to the old server. So what you don't do is migrate it and turn the old one off immediately. You always leave the old service running for a few days.
Okay.
Because of the way that the website domains are set up with this thing called DNS servers. There is just a delay when you make any changes to those. So it might be that we switch the new website live, and a new visitor comes on and they see the new website within a minute, and that's fine. But it may be somebody has been on your old website that morning and their DNS server has taken a cache of which server it's attached to. And that cache doesn't get refreshed for 4 hours. So they'll continue to see the old website, even though new visitors will see the new one. But that DNS cache is usually only a few hours. If it's something called a name server cache, then it can be a bit longer, sort of 24 hours. And in some cases, 48 hours. But
that would be like downtime. That would be, people would still be able to see the website. They would just be seeing different bits.
Yeah. And if it's, for example, a blog, and you haven't made any blog posts in that 24 hours, then people won't even know there's a difference anyway.
Brilliant. So to answer that question, it can be transferred over, and it happens pretty blooming quickly too.
Yeah.
So the next question is looking beyond the website itself and email options, whether to go with a generic email account that's easy transportable, or whether to go with one that's directly linked to your domain. So I imagine this is more about Office 365, isn't it?
It could be. I mean, Office 365 is definitely one way of having a premium, or your own branded email. I mean, generally speaking, now using anything that's got at Hotmail or at Gmail or at Outlook.com, anything like that, is just seen as not professional on a website. Now, if you're a really, really, really tiny website, it's not really going to do much. And if, like, for example, a plumber might be a good example. You're not really bothered about the impression of how professional they are as an organization. You're buying some person's skills there, and if they're great at that, that's fine. That's not going to be an issue. But if you've got a company or a small office or any sort of anything where you're starting to move out of just an individual person's broad skill set, and you want to set an impression, and that's part of your brand, then you absolutely want your own branded domain email address. So at mywebsite.com. The question that comes up quite a lot is, do I have my own name, or do I have something generic? And what I usually recommend is you would have your own name as your personal email as part of that organization, but on your website have info at, or hello at, or website at, whatever you want, and have that forward to your personal email. So that way your personal email isn't on the web, but anybody who emails it, you'll get a copy of that immediately. But also that gives you a bit more scope for flexibility in the future. So let's say you take on more staff, you can have that info out forward to somebody else who deals with inquiries in the future. Or it just lets you change things up, so you can have 2 or 3 people copied in, whatever you want, and then whoever gets the email first can reply to it.
And that's a really, really good point as well. Okay, this one is a little bit more, this is a bit more SEO based, I think. So the lady's asked about labeling every image on her website, whether it's visible or not. So that's the first question. There's 3 questions to hers. So I guess that is about obviously labeling in pictures, but I think alt tags are quite useful, aren't they?
Yes.
And there's that kind of information, and that helps your SEO, doesn't it?
Yes. Alt tags are definitely a good thing. They're good for your SEO, and they're good for people with visual impairment. So definitely do that as much as you can. What you'll find is, like a lot of SEO or aspects of your website's SEO, it's not necessarily about getting 100% score on an SEO scan of your website, because some of that's not really feasible. And this is a good example of that. So, website that scans if you scan your website with an SEO scanner and it comes up saying, some of your images don't have alt tags. If those are images that are part of the actual sort of content, you absolutely want to have alt tags on those. So let's say it's an About Us page and it's got a picture of the team. You want to have that labeled, photo of the team. If it's just a generic swirl that's a decorative image and has no real bearing on the content, then actually you don't really need alt tags on that at all. It doesn't really add any value to anything. You can still do it, and I think there might be a very slight SEO benefit to doing that, depending on what you're doing. But realistically, I would focus on the content images and the important parts of your website that are using those, and I wouldn't really worry about the decorative images with alt tags.
You should hear about whether the images are visible or not. I'm guessing that the not ones are probably old products or things like that are no longer actually available on the site.
I interpreted that as more like whether they're just purely decorative images, like images in the background and stuff like that. But if you mean images that are no longer accessible, then I probably wouldn't worry about that. But if Google is indexing your pages, so it might be a page you don't really use, but Google's still got it in the index, then it is worth adding your alt tag to that images on that page anyway.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. She also mentioned about keywords and how to best utilize these, which I know is just a big old subject. I may need to pick your brains again for an SEO one in the future. But on my website, I've got the Yoast plugin, which I really like, which is SEO helps with keywords and things like that. But do you have any kind of quick tips for keywords and how to utilize them when you are working on your content?
I think the rule of thumb really is to optimize for your users rather than for Google, and think about it from their point of view. Because actually, when you drill down into SEO boils down to generally Google, certainly in the UK. And when you look at what Google is doing, Google is trying to provide the highest quality website experiences that it can in the search results. Because as soon as you type something in and you get some rubbish website, you're going to think, well, that wasn't a very good search. I'll try something else. And you don't get what you're looking for there. You're going to go off to Bing or any other search engines. And that's Google's, they'll be gone overnight if that happens, if they start providing really, really poor results. So it's in their interests to make sure that the websites that appear in their search results offer the most relevant, the most engaging, and the most up-to-date information that they can, that the websites are accessible, that they're easy to use, they're laid out in a really, really intuitive manner, and that things like alt tags are present, because if someone accesses your website with a screen reader, that's just as viable as someone without, so you don't want to just cut those guys off. No. You've got to make sure that everybody gets the best experience they can. And so in terms of keywords, I would look at it from that point of view. You're optimizing for those searchers. You're not optimizing for Google. And so you need to provide the best experience for those guys. So in terms of keywords, make sure that your content is well written, that it's relevant, that it's the right level of information. And that's 90% of your keyword optimization done. Because if you write a good article about a certain subject,
it should have those words in, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and you can definitely improve that slightly. You can tweak it to add a few little keywords. And one thing that can be really good is using keywords in the headings on the page.
Yes, the H1 and H2s.
That's right. But again, that all still ties into this thing of making an intuitive layout. If you have just a big block of text, that's not going to be as intuitive and as engaging as a block of text that's broken up into several chunks with a little heading on each paragraph that tells you, or each section that tells you what that's about. So ultimately, that rule of thumb applies to almost every aspect of SEO.
And this will work with product descriptions as well, when obviously we can talk about long form content in terms of like long form blogs and things like that. But with product descriptions as well, it's the same animal, isn't it?
Exactly the same. Yeah. And I think if you give a really good description that sells that product to the user and includes a list of all the features, that's a great list of keywords, and, like I say, you can still tweak that. Definitely, it will get you almost all the way there, but there is a little bit more you can do. You can slightly include an extra keyword here and there, as long as it all still reads naturally and it all still has relevant information. That's fine, and will give you a little bit of a boost. So definitely look at that. But otherwise, make sure you're writing the right content. And one thing that comes up quite a lot is people are trying to optimize for keywords without having the right content there. And if you find yourself thinking, oh, how can I shoehorn this keyword into this page? Maybe it's not the right page, or maybe you need to restructure it so that you split it into 2 pages, and that lets you then get the keywords in much more naturally.
I think that actually leads really nicely on to the other question, which is part of the 3-parter question, which is about how to drive more traffic to the website. And obviously there's loads of ways to do that. But from an SEO point of view, if you're doing the things that you've said, it's going to help you, because you're going to get higher up in the rankings and you're going to get that organic traffic. Obviously you can pay for it. You can drive traffic from social. There are lots of different ways. But yes, setting your website up so it's easy to use, so it is found by Google, because it's not just getting people to the website, it's keeping them on it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's a fine line between keeping people on your website and actually having people sort of navigate your website because they're looking for something and they can't quite find it and they spend a bit too much time looking for something. But generally, yeah, you want to encourage people to look through other pages. But equally, if somebody's looking for a service you offer, they type it into Google and your landing page for that shows up top, and they get onto there, they find the information that they want, then actually you don't want them to mess around too much. You want them to phone you immediately and say, you know what, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Make a phone call. And actually, you know, that would count as a bounce in your analytics reports. That would be technically you would want to kind of minimize. But in this case, actually, that's not the case. So yes, you do definitely want people to engage with stuff, but also you must make sure that if you're looking for people who don't necessarily have to look through other pages to get the information they want, just get it all on that page and get the clear calls to action so that they read something and they get to the bottom of it. And there's a thing, you want more information? Call us on this number. Then job done, really.
I think that's a really good point as well, because I get quite into the analytics of, you know, Google Analytics and stuff on my website. And actually sometimes things like the bounce rate, which, you know, you want to have a low bounce rate. But as you say, actually, if someone goes to the right page that they're directed from, let's say, your social media or from Google, and they get all the information they need from that page, and then they make that call to action and that converts, that's the whole point of your website. But in the analytics, that's potentially seen in a negative light because they didn't move around as much as it'd like them to. Yes.
And I think the trick there is to look for a moderate bounce rate. So 40 to 60 is usually fine. And look for a steady bounce rate. You know, if you update some stuff and your bounce rate rockets, then maybe something's gone wrong. Or if you haven't updated some stuff and the bounce rate rockets, maybe there's a server issue and one of your pages is no longer loading. So look for stuff like that, definitely. But I generally recommend people don't worry too much about bounce rate because it's so hard to interpret that behavior as good and bad. Just look for a consistent bounce rate that's right for your industry. I mean, look at Wikipedia. Bounce rate of Wikipedia is probably 95% because you type something in, you get the information, you close it. Great. Yeah. And that's so it would be hard to blame Wikipedia for having a high bounce rate if people are getting, you know, great information from it. But likewise, a shop, you do want a very low bounce rate because you're going to have an add to cart page, you're going to have a checkout page. So if you've got a shop and you've got a high bounce rate, actually that is something you would want to actively sort of reduce. That's really interesting. Well, you've been an absolute diamond. I feel my brain is about to explode for that information in a really positive way. That's good. No, really, it's really, really positive. And I think that, you know, all the things you've covered are really going to help people, not just to understand at the very basic level, but just understand that little bit more that will give them that confidence to ask questions, get quotes, speak to different people, and make choices that are really good for them, which is what we all want, isn't it, really? Yes, of course. So can you tell us all the places you are? Because I'm sure people are going to want to reach out and probably pick your brains. But as I say, I use Ray for my hosting, and actually his lovely team have just made some tweaks to my site, and I'm genuinely thrilled. It was so easy to do as well. I've had Ellis. That's right. On your team, who's been in touch with me, who's been an absolute diamond, and really can't rate you highly enough. That's your RIA stamp of approval. It's a good name. That's great to hear. Yes, I like to think so. Anyway, where can we find you? So we've got our website, which is worcesterwebstudio.com, or you can just Google Worcester Web Studio. We're also on Facebook, so it's just facebook.com/Worcester Web Studio. We're on Twitter, which is Worcs Web Studio, WORCS Web Studio, and LinkedIn, which is we're on /company/Worcester-Web-Studio. But with any of those, I would say just Google us, and then you'll get there. I don't think you need to really go direct if that's a problem. Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking to me, and indeed everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.